Module is to help you differentiate the areas of communication based on different descriptions and then relate the areas of communication to one another. Before we get started, I want you to answer a couple of questions to yourself. Number one is, when I say communication, what do you think communication is? Do you think that it is just a conversation? Or do you think that it doesn't have to be a conversation? It can be someone across a room that you wave to, or it can be the person driving by that cut you off and you wave something to them. Is that a communication? And then when we talk about conversation, what do you think conversation is, and what happens during a conversation? Is conversation an exchange of information? Is it only one-sided, or do you have to have a speaker and a listener? And then once we get into that conversation, how do we speak? So right now, as I'm speaking, how is that sound coming out of my mouth? How do you get that information and understand what I'm saying? And then, what do you believe that oral communication is? When I say oral communication, I want you to start thinking about different types of communication, because we know that waving is a different type of communication than speaking is. So when I say oral communication, that is verbal, or words coming out of my mouth. If I say nonverbal or non-oral communication, then that includes gestures or symbols or signs. Talk about communication, we have to break it down into the different pieces and parts. So you'll notice in this module I'm going to refer to the different parts of communication as a hierarchy. And when I talk about the hierarchy, it's kind of an imperfect hierarchy. So as we're going through, you'll notice that phonation or voicing really is the foundation of our speech. Right? And we can't have resonation without phonation, and we can't have articulation without phonation or resonation, and we can't have fluency without phonation, resonation, or articulation. But we can have language without speech, right? If I'm writing, I'm not speaking, but I can write that information down, which is my nonverbal communication, or my non-oral communication. Now with cognition, we have to have cognition and we have to have phonation in order to have oral communication. So if phonation or voicing is happening, then I have to be able to process the information about my world. If I don't know what's going on in the world around me, I don't know what room I'm in, I can't hold my attention, it doesn't really matter what's coming out of my mouth, right? It doesn't matter that I'm speaking. And then I have to have a hearing ability so that I can hear words in my environment around me, so that as I develop my language and I develop my ability to speak, I can find the right way to speak and put my tongue in my mouth to shape those sounds. Okay, so when you see hierarchy, it's kind of a loose term for this course. But today we're going to start at the very bottom of this hierarchy and talk about phonation or voicing. So phonation is just very simply the production of sound. Phonation is a very fancy word for voice, and if you think about voice, is just when you hear my voice rise and fall. If I go, ah, that's my voice. Okay, it's very simply just sound. Resonation is the modification of that sound as it bounces through my mouth, my nose, and my throat. So my voice really starts about in this area right here at the level of my vocal cords, and then it travels up through my throat and out of my mouth or through my nose for certain sounds. How I shape those sounds is articulation, and shaping sounds or articulation is very simply just movements. So my tongue is going to touch the roof of my mouth, either in the front or the back, or it might go through my teeth for different sounds. And if I put my lips together, it's going to make a different sound, and I'll change my airflow. That's articulation. Okay, articulation is just movement. So if I go, ah, that's my voice. But if I say ba 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 ba, that's articulation. If I say ba pa ba pa ba pa, that's articulation. Fluency is the smooth flowing rhythm of speech. So as my voice rises and falls during conversation and my words come easily out of my mouth, I have kind of a rhythm to it, and that is fluency. If I start to say then I'm a little bit disfluent, where things aren't coming out so easily. Language is the rules and meanings, and that means that right now while you're listening to this lecture, we share the same language. You have rules to know the words that I'm saying and understanding that meaning. And I have rules that say I need to put this sentence in a specific order. And if I were speaking another language, then I might have different word orders to produce sentences. Now, cognition is the ability to process information about the world. So it's kind of an overarching thing, and this is where that hierarchy breaks down a little bit more. So my example for this is right now I'm sitting in my living room and I have two super cute dogs, and they are pacing and they want to play. And so my attention is going to be pulled over to them to watch them or to see what they're doing, and maybe you want to get involved. And you might notice that sometimes I might get a little bit distracted, or I'm looking over here and maybe there's a breakdown in my communication. Maybe I don't say something as clearly. It doesn't make sense to you. And that's because my attention is getting pulled to this other area, and attention is an area of cognition. So cognition relates to language, and language relates to cognition. I have to be aware, I have to be awake, I have to be alert, I have to know where I am, I have to be able to hold my attention to keep a conversation topic, and I have to have memory to know what the information is that I'm talking about that I've learned before. Okay, that's cognition, and it kind of integrates into oral communication. Hearing is the ability to hear and detect sounds. So that is very simply just that sound coming into the ear. And then listening is really interpreting and understanding what those sounds mean when they come in. So if I say the word star, you know that meaning, right? That sound for star came in through your ears, it went to your brain, and your brain told you what star means. Okay, and so we have to have hearing, number one, so that you can hear the message that I'm saying, but number two, so that I can hear my message, and if I make a mistake in my articulation or that shaping of the sounds, or I say the wrong word, or I say something that's confusing, I can hear what I'm saying and fix my message. Okay? So this is kind of the foundation of this course, and you might say, wait a second, there are other modules, and the other modules have different names, and I don't understand how does swallowing get into oral communication, and we're going to go through that. So this is kind of a different view of what we just went over. So we have our oral communication over here, and we have our pieces and parts, right? We have our cognition and our language and our fluency, and they kind of overlap each other and work together with articulation. We have the influence of hearing, we have our resonance and our voice, and then we have respiration or breathing, okay? And we'll talk about voice and respiration in the same lecture. Now, this is an introduction to communication disorders course, which means that we're reviewing two different fields of profession, speech language pathology and audiology. And those fields have come together and found that they know lots of things about respiration and resonation and articulation and language and fluency and cognition. And as it turns out, there are other areas that share structures or brain areas that influence different things. So swallowing is covered because it shares anatomy in the brain and the structures of the face and the throat with respiration, voice, resonance, and articulation, okay? And then there are areas of our nervous system that also give us the movements so that we can create the shapes in our mouth with the sounds or articulation. We have areas of the nervous system that tell us how to open and close our vocal folds in our throat to create voice. We have commands for breathing to tell us when it's time to take a breath or to hold our breath or hold our breath out. And then we also have areas of the brain that tell us, it's kind of our filing cabinet that tells us all of these words that I've learned have meanings, and these are what the meanings are, okay? And then the different rules for how we put sentences together and how we put words together to create phrases or to change the meanings of our sentences or the structure of our sentences. So we're going to learn about many different areas in this course. We're going to start with the anatomy, which is going to include the nervous system and the different anatomy for each of the parts of oral communication and swallowing. Our next lecture is going to go into swallowing because it'll give you a good picture of what's going on here in the throat in ways that you've never thought about before. And then we'll go into voice because it shares similar structures with swallowing, and we'll move up from there to cognition and then end with hearing. Okay, so for the completion of this module, you'll need to read the book attached below this video. You're going to read chapter 1 of your textbook, and then there's a discussion forum post that you'll need to complete.